wanted to take some time today in the sanctuary to talk about forgiveness and especially to talk about some of the common myths that are associated with forgiveness that can get in the way if forgiveness isn't properly understood. Sometimes our ideas about what forgiveness means gets in the way of our ability to forgive ourselves, forgive others. So I wanted to share that with you today, and then we'll engage in a forgiveness practice together. Um, I wanted to kick us off with a quote from Desmond Tutu, who in my mind is one of the greatest symbols of forgiveness. And he wrote together, I believe it was with his daughter, he wrote a book called The Book of Forgiving. And he says, and I really am touched by this quote, "The quality of human life on this planet is nothing more than the sum total of our daily interactions with each other. Forgiveness is the way we set those interactions right. It is how we bring peace to ourselves and our world. It is our greatest gift and only hope." I really love that. Forgiveness is the way we set those interactions right. I don't think I'm alone in feeling that during these months, I've been very thin-skinned at times. I've been more irritable. I've been less patient and less compassionate than I would like to be. And forgiveness, in a way, can give me and give you, if you're feeling any of that, kind of a regular opportunity to check in, find that compassion for myself, yourself, with what we're going through right now, and then offer. It actually is a beautiful gift that we ultimately give ourselves. And though forgiveness can be practiced, just much like compassion, forgiveness can be cultivated within us, and the conditions for forgiveness to arise in us can be cultivated. It's at the same time important to remember that true forgiveness can never be rushed, can never be forced, that forgiveness has its own inherent timing, especially if we've been deeply, deeply hurt by someone. It can take more time and more space to process that hurt so that the doors of forgiveness can open. Another famous quote for me about forgiveness is a quote that many of you have probably heard from Nelson Mandela when he discussed what it was like leaving prison. And he said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." So, in the most simplest terms, forgiveness is a movement of the heart, a capacity of the heart, just like he said, to leave the bitterness, to leave the hatred behind, a capacity of the heart to let go and heal from those hurts, from those losses, from those heartbreaks that are really an inevitable part of this human journey, right? We've all been around the block. We've all lived long enough to know that hurt, disappointment, loss, heartbreak, they are part of life. And forgiveness is sort of gives us an opportunity to see, how do we want to respond to those hurts that are part of our life? Do we want to let them turn us bitter and hateful, or do we want to respond to them in a softer, gentler, more compassionate way? That's the movement of the heart that forgiveness can offer us. And this movement of the heart has sort of two major components to it. First, inbuilt into forgiveness is a deep recognition of the hurt or pain that was caused, either that was caused to us or that we caused another. So, there's this saying, let's forgive and forget. No, forgiveness actually isn't about forgetting. Forgiveness begins with a deep turning towards a deep acknowledgement of what either pain we're carrying or maybe pain that we caused. And then second, the second component is a desire to not let the heart harden because of that hurt. So there's a recognition of the hurt and the pain, and then a desire to not turn bitter and cold out of response of that hurt. So how do we do that, right? That's a practice in and of itself, to not let our hurts cause this armoring, which can build up. All of you joining have been hurt in life, and you've probably all had moments of feeling like your heart was getting armored to sort of protect against more hurt. Anytime we're betrayed, anytime we're deeply, judged or deeply violated in some way, we can armor up to as a form of protection. And so forgiveness actually offers us a different form of protection, not one that comes from armoring, but one that comes from softening and embracing that hurt, but not letting it close our heart off, not letting it block our heart's natural capacity for love. So in that way, forgiveness can be seen as a practice that we engage in on a pretty regular basis, because as we know, pretty much every day something stings, something hurts. There's obviously degrees of hurt and pain that we experience, but I would bargain to say that going through this pandemic, forgiveness is something we could probably be offering to ourselves almost every day, and asking for or offering to others as well. As Dr. King so wisely said, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He or she who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we truly discover this, we're less prone to hate our enemies. He also said, forgiveness is not an occasional act, but a permanent attitude. I love that. So it's no wonder that forgiveness is part of every religious and spiritual tradition on the planet, right? It's one of the most powerful attitudes we can cultivate. And forgiveness together with compassion helps our hearts stay open in the midst of what's going on around us. And I feel like that is so needed on our planet right now. It's so easy right now, especially to close down, to harden, to get bitter. And some of you may recognize that in yourself. I've certainly recognized that in me over these months. And whenever I start to feel that hardening and bitterness coming in, it's kind of a good red flag for me to go, okay, wait a minute, something's going on. I need to draw from these practices. And forgiveness is, if you will, a lifelong practice of coming to terms with how messy and challenging life can be, and how we all as humans are capable, as Dr. King said, we're capable of great love, and we're capable of great harm. So a couple of myths just to go over that can get in the way of us really understanding what forgiveness is at a deeper level and opening to it. The first myth, this is what psychologists have said is the most common idea that gets in the way of us being able to forgive others. And that's that if we forgive someone or even forgive ourselves, it's sort of in somehow saying that what that person did was okay. It's somehow condoning or letting them off the hook, excusing what happened. So I just want to debunk that right up front. Forgiveness is never about condoning or excusing what happened. It's not about glossing over or denying the seriousness of any kind of offense or hurt that we endured. As I said earlier, the deeper foundation of forgiveness is built on the capacity to acknowledge the hurt, acknowledge the suffering that took place, acknowledge maybe the pain that's even still there. It just says it hurt, but I'm going to choose to move on anyway. So forgiveness is never about excusing the other person. And forgiveness is never something that we should do, right? Again, we can't force it, we can't rush it, and there is such a thing as premature forgiveness, when we say the words, oh, I forgive you, but we haven't really done the work of acknowledging the pain that's there. That has to happen first. It's being with that suffering, being with that pain ultimately, that allows those doors of forgiveness to open. So when thinking about forgiveness, don't think of it so much in terms of condoning it or excusing or turning in any way away from what happened, but think of it as a deep turning towards what happened. Another myth, another idea that can get in the way is this idea that if we forgive someone, it means we need to, let them back into our life or reconcile with them, or restart the relationship. And that may be true in some cases when we want to reconcile, but reconciliation is actually different from forgiveness. And you don't have to reconcile with someone. You don't have to ever see a person again in your life in order to forgive them. And it may be completely appropriate to never engage with that person again, and yet we can still forgive. In this sense, forgiveness is something internal. It's something that happens in our own heart. It's letting that person out of the grip of blame in our own heart, out of the grip of hatred. And that's ultimately for us. It frees our own heart when we're able to do that. If later on we want to have them back into our lives, then we can engage in a very different process, which is the process of reconciliation. That process is much more complex because that requires both people to do some pretty serious inner work, and it involves the person that caused the harm to apologize, to commit to changing their behavior. And so that requires both parties. Forgiveness only requires you. It only requires one party. And kind of connected to that myth is another myth that, well, I can really only forgive them if they deserve my forgiveness, if they feel some remorse for what they've done, right? If they apologize, then I can forgive them. And again, that's not true forgiveness. True forgiveness happens in me. Archbishop Tutu put it this way: I need to forgive you so that my anger, my resentment, and my own lust for revenge doesn't corrode my own being, right? So it's about clearing our own being, our own hearts from that energy of hatred. Many of you have probably heard this quote that keeping resentments or not forgiving someone is like swallowing poison and hoping the other person will die. So we want to be able to let go of those poisons for our own sake, so that we can open our heart and move forward. And the last myth I'll share just for today is that if I forgive, that means that the pain will just automatically go away. I'll never feel angry. I'll never feel hurt towards this person again. And that's not necessarily true. Forgiveness, in my understanding and practice of it over these many, many years, is an ongoing practice, much like meditation. It's an ongoing process of turning towards what's in our heart, turning towards the suffering, if it's still there, the anger, if it's still there, meeting it with compassion so that it can release. And we may need to do that depending on the level and the degree of our hurt. We may need to do that again and again and again throughout our life with the very same person. Those of you that are in relationships, that are in marriages, forgiveness can be an integral part of that relationship, because we hurt each other as humans. not necessarily because we're bad people, but because when we get stressed, when we get anxious, when we're living in a pandemic, we're not living often from the very most open, patient part of ourselves. And so we hurt and we cause hurt, we experience hurt. And that's why a lot of spiritual teachers say that forgiveness is one of the core spiritual practices of our lifetime. Over and over, we get to see how we've gotten armored again and how we can soften and release that armor. One of the most powerful ways, and this is the last thing I'll share, and then we'll get to practice, do a little forgiveness practice together. One of the most powerful findings in all of the research that's been done on forgiveness, and there's been quite a bit of research done and studies done, almost 4 decades of hundreds and hundreds of studies on forgiveness and forgiveness practices. And one of the most common findings in the research of what makes a forgiveness practice effective is that when the person that was hurt is able to see over there the common humanity in the person that hurt us. And by that I mean to be able to recognize that whenever somebody hurts us, disappoints us, rejects us, betrays us, even violates or inflicts violence on us, that they themselves are hurting in that moment. Again, this doesn't condone or make right the behavior or what they did to us, but it does widen out the context. It does help us to hold that behavior in a bigger context and to recognize that whenever someone is abusive or deeply hurtful to us, it's because they themselves are suffering. Human beings that aren't suffering don't cause a lot of suffering, but hurt people hurt people. And when we're really able at a deep level to recognize that this person over there is got their own suffering, and that suffering is what causes them to act in these unhealthy ways, that recognition can soften our heart, can, as Maya Angelou said, can free our heart from needing to hold this person as an enemy and can just see them as a fellow broken, hurting human being. So I'll close with this last quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who wrote, "If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each of their lives a sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all our hostility." So that's what happens in a forgiveness practice. Somehow we're able, even for a moment, to read that secret history of our enemies, to recognize the suffering over there. And when we can do that, our hearts can soften